The EU brought in this new Trade Secrets Directive, which is intended to protect corporate intellectual property. It allows corporations to sue or take to court people who use their secrets or reveal their secrets. And of course that's a problem, because it means that they will be able to take whistleblowers to court. So it's a prohibition essentially against freedom of information and transparency on corporate power. So that's at least a quite significant problem in terms of encouraging transparency on EU decision making, and indeed, of course, UK decision making, since the UK government is going to put the directive into UK law with even less protections than the EU is proposing at present. It means that corporations are more able to cover up their misdeeds. They're more able to keep information in-house which could in principle, or should perhaps in principle in terms of the public interest, be shared in public. So it allows them to evade responsibility for their actions in a very significant way. I work at a university, okay? And universities are supposed to be there to produce scientific or social scientific knowledge in a way which is unbiased and which gets to the heart or the base of any particular social problem or issue. Think tanks are there to pursue the interests of their funders. Think tanks are not independent research institutes. They largely do not produce academic research. The research that they do produce is usually not peer-reviewed, which is the key check on the standards of science amongst university scientists and social scientists. So think tanks are fake academic institutes pretending to produce genuine research, but what they really do is produce material to support the interests of their sponsors, and their sponsors can be large corporations or conservative foundations giving money to try and push government policy in an even more neoliberal or neoconservative direction than it already is in. The problem with think tanks is only a small part of the problem of deception, misinformation and manipulation which neoliberalism brings with it. It created effectively the public relations industry, the lobbying industry, and think tanks are part of that industry which tries to distort public debate and to make sure that the interests of the sponsors of those organisations and industries prevail in government policy making. So, how do you solve that problem? Well, first of all, you have to implement a number of transparency measures across the whole of the society, not just governments or lobbyists, and think tanks should be forced to disclose how much money they get, where they get it from, what it's for, and information about what they do with it. So that's first of all, they should be forced to disclose that at the level of Parliament and engagement with policymakers, but they should also be required to disclose how much money they spend on academic research or on activities in courtrooms or in the health service or in science and a whole range of other areas where they are active. So, for example, there's a government advisory system where scientists are brought together to advise government on the safety of chemicals or whether drugs should be prescribed to patients, etc. And those systems have conflict of interest declarations attached to them, but they're ineffective, poorly monitored, and there's no body overseeing the way in which private corporations might try and influence experts who are advising government with potential consequences for the health and well-being of millions of citizens. So the transparency regulations would need to go across the whole range of the society, not just in Parliament and Westminster, but also in universities and hospitals and law firms, etc. So there needs to be a step change in transparency, first of all. Second of all, we need to start to manage down conflicts of interest. Where a scientist advising government on sugar and nutrition gets money from Coca-Cola, they should no longer be allowed to advise. It's straightforward. It shouldn't be allowed. It is allowed at present, amazingly enough. But so there's a question of managing down conflicts of interest in the system. And that kind of process depending on how far it goes, how fast it goes, would eventually manage out of the system think tanks altogether. We wouldn't have think tanks. There's no need for think tanks at all in our system. No need for lobbying companies, actually, either. If you want to know how the world operates, you go to academics and scientists. You don't need think tanks. If you want to know what the interests or ideas of business or any citizens are, you ask them. You don't need to have lobbyists to distort the policy process. So essentially what you would need to do is, or want to do, is to increase transparency and conflict of interest rules and regulations, to manage those conflicts out of the system, to essentially de-corrupt the existing policy system, which is at present corrupted by corporate money. ACOBA is the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. It, I was going to say, regulates the passage of former ministers into the private or public sectors after they leave their jobs as ministers, but it doesn't actually regulate. It's the clue to that is in the title of the committee. It's the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, and it takes applications from former ministers who might want to go off to work for a pharmaceutical company or an arms firm or any other delightful company like that, and they advise on whether they should be doing that, or how long after they leave their job they should be doing that, and whether they should be discussing what they learned as health minister with the chemist, and that's a real example. It's an advisory committee in the sense that it advises whether the person should do that or not, but no one has to pay any attention to it. It's not binding, there's no regulation. So it's a joke of a committee, and that's not just me who thinks that, that's the actual parliamentary committees themselves who have examined this. The last one examined that, decided that ACOBA was a joke and should be abolished. And instead they should have some proper regulation of the revolving door, because it means that corporations can buy up political expertise, and in particular contacts in the political world with ministers who've been there to serve the public interest. Either ministers, politicians, strange as it might seem, old-fashioned as it might seem, either they're there to represent the public, the electorate, or they're not, and they shouldn't be going on to represent corporate interests after they leave public service. They should go back to whatever they were doing before. Spinwatch is a website which monitors, does public interest reporting on public relations, spin, propaganda and the like, and it's a project of a non-profit company called Public Interest Investigations, which was set up in 2005. And we essentially do investigations of corruption, of lobbying, of think tanks. We do stuff on propaganda, on war, on foreign policy, on Islamophobia and racism, and a whole range of other things. And so Spinwatch is a website which publishes our investigations, and we also have another website called Powerbase, which provides profiles of important organisations and individuals who are engaged in lobbying or think tank world or in corruption in some way. Powerbase is written by a variety of people who are either people who are working with or for us or volunteers, but it's done only by people who use their public real name, and all edits that they do can be tracked, so that there's a way of checking back what's been put in there and how accurate it is. And we have, of course, a policy of correcting mistakes and indeed of publishing a right to reply should anyone wish a right to reply on an organisation or an individual with which they're associated.